shepherd of Israel. Give ear, O shepherd of Israel. You are the one who feeds us. You are the one who leads us.
Hello again and welcome to another episode of 2,730 Years and Counting. And those of you who have listened to previous podcasts know and seen the show know that this is Gene Porter, and this show is about my passion, which is the reunification of the two houses of Israel. And oh, by the way, it's also Yehovah's passion. Just all you have to do is read Jeremiah 32:41 and see the one thing that he says that he will do with his whole heart and his whole soul. So this is not about Gene at all. This is about Yehovah and what he wants and how important it is to do what he wants us to do to get this to come to pass, to do the pushing that we need to be pushing. Today, I'm very thrilled to have a guest on. I've had it 2 or 3 times before, and those of you who have listened to his previous presentations will enjoy this one as well. This is Aleksandar Veljic of Serbia, and Aleksandar is one of those guys that all you have to do is just push the on button, and he's on as much as he needs to be on for as long as he needs to be on. And so with that being said, I give you Aleksandar Veljic. Aleksandar, thank you for joining us again, and really look forward to hearing what you have to say today.
Greetings and shalom, friends. What a lovely opportunity to talk to you, especially after the most satanic of all the holidays that have been celebrated by the so-called Christian world, so-called Halloween. But let's get on with much more exciting and wonderful biblical stuff. We promised to you that we will be delivering messages about all tribes of Israel. So we have already given I've given a very good and very successful interview on the House of Judah, which has elicited much interest, and I'm happy that after me there was a wonderful lady from Jerusalem who also gave a brilliant interview on this very air, and her interview surpassed all the other interviews, and her popularity has risen so great, which is great because the House of Judah is also being awakening to the reality of the 10 tribes. So today let's talk about the two brothers who are grouped together in the scriptures. There are Simeon and Levi, the two brothers. And if we have time, we can also touch upon another tribe, which is the tribe of Dan, which is very significant because the Irish people are descendants of Dan, and the current American president is of Irish descent. So I'm pretty sure that many of you would be very interested to hear about what he comes from. So anyhow, Simeon, there is something interesting about these two brothers. The Apostle Paul in Romans chapter 10, in verse 1 and 2, speaks about his kinsmen. He says, they have zeal for God, but not according to knowledge. Now, Levi had it sometimes, but now we're talking about Simeon. Simeon was a very small tribe, and they were all encircled in the Holy Land. They were encircled by Judah. And there is something interesting how they got the name. It's in Genesis chapter 29, and in verse 33, the mother of Simeon said, because the Eternal has heard what that I was hated, he has therefore given me this son also. And she called his name Simeon. Now Simeon means hearing, so it means hearing. And then we come to Genesis chapter 49, when Jacob, their father, prophesies of Simeon and Levi together. And it's interesting, in Genesis 49, he's at his deathbed, and now he's talking about these two tribes, these two sons, and he says, Simeon and Levi are brethren. Now this is quite interesting because, friends, all the 12 tribes, all the 12 brothers were brethren, weren't they?
Yes.
So this term, that they are brethren, this must mean more than biological. It means that they obviously had the same outlook and the same interest. They were partners in their interests and outlooks. And then the prophecy continues. He says, instruments of cruelty are in their habitations. O my soul, come not thou in their secret. Unto their assembly mine honor be thou not united. For in their anger they slew a man, and in their self-will they digged down a wall. Cursed be their anger, for it was fierce. For their wrath, for it was cruel. I'll divide them in Jacob and scatter them in Israel. And this is exactly what happened. This is exactly what happened. And before we get into the biblical account again, there was some scattering and there were some traces of Simeon that could be found in various toponyms. For example, there were people of Italy on the borders of Umbria, that is the borders of Germany, on the Elbe and other rivers, and the people were called Semnones, which is very interesting. There were also people of Gaul, which are mentioned in the historical records. They were called Samnitae. And also there were Samnites, a people of Italy, and they inhabited basically the country situated between several Italian provinces, between Picenium, Campania, Puglia, and ancient Latium. And it says in the historical record that these Samnites were distinguished by their implacable hatred against the Romans in the first stages of that empire, till they were at last totally extirpated in 2072 before Christ, after a war of 71 years. This is what the historian Strabo tells us about. Now back to Simeon. The prophecy of Moses in Deuteronomy chapter 33 about Simeon in verse 7, it says, "Hear the Eternal, the voice of Judah." So the Simeon is not even mentioned. That's interesting. But this hear, so since Simeon means hearing, this hear Eternal also is indication that Simeon was with Judah, because the Simeon is basically the only tribe that is not mentioned in the blessings of Moses. However, again, by this sentence, hear Eternal, there is indication that they were basically joined with Judah, which is also interesting because if we know anything about the history of Scotland, and I think we touched upon this already in one of our previous interviews, many people, there were various parts of Simeon in the northern England, and they crossed the border and then inhabited Scotland. And then we also know that from the very northernmost part of Europe, which is the peninsula Judenland or Jutland in Denmark. Of course, there were many Jewish people who came to that area by foot, and then they crossed the sea and then inhabited Scotland as well. And we talked about that in an interview about Jewish people. There is various traces and various degrees of Jewish blood among the Scottish people and as well as among the Irish, especially in Northern Ireland. So here is indication in Deuteronomy that Simeon was with Judah. And in Genesis chapter 34, you have an extensive scriptural record of the crime that was committed by Simeon and by Levi. Instead of slaying Shechem, who disgraced their sister, they killed basically a whole city of Canaanites. Now something also happened with Simeon, and it's recorded in 1 Chronicles chapter 4, and in verses 38 through 43, and it happened during the reign of King Hezekiah. And during the reign of that king, many Simeonites migrated south to Edom, south of the Holy Land, and they were conquered they conquered also, and they displaced Amalekites. So in 1 Chronicles chapter 4, we have this record in the scriptures. There is also something interesting about Simeon. They were very small in a number. For example, if you compare Numbers chapter 1 and verse 23, when all the tribes were enumerated, there were 59,300 Simeonites. But then nearly 40 years later, in Numbers 24, verse 14, there were counted only 22,200 Simeonites. So there was a large number of them that obviously did not go into the Holy Land, because the first census was held when they left Egypt, and then this nearly 40 years later, another census one before they entered into the Promised Land. So this,
I have a question. I have a question for you. I've heard. In fact, I've heard it taught in my Torah study group as a possibility that Simeon many from Simeon may have moved to Greece and become Spartans. Have you ever heard that?
Yes, I've heard that. In fact, well, it is true, and it is also well. There are also other, shall we say, theories also that the tribe of Dan was also part with was
Sparta.
well,
Okay.
at least was Sparta or making up the Sparta. But
Right.
it's interesting, for example, in Merton Smith's book Israel, Her Racial Divisions and Geographical Wanderings, there is this wonderful description about Simeon. Now, this will maybe of interest to your Torah study group as well, and to all of our listeners, because what this author says, that he says that the quarrel with Moses, because we might remember there was a quarrel with Zimri in Numbers 25 and verse 14. You remember there was that son of the chief of the Simeonites, Zimri, who took a foreign wife. And that provoked so much of Israel. So he was killed by Phinehas, a righteous Phinehas. So anyway, there ensued a quarrel with Moses between obviously Simeonites and Moses, and it seems this author says that such a quarrel has never been straightened. It has never been straightened out, and the tribe of Simeon is not mentioned, as we said in Moses' blessings of the tribes of Deuteronomy 33. And then the other 11 tribes are recorded, of course, in Deuteronomy 33, but Simeon is not. And Simeon's lot in the Holy Land was really a restricted one. And although it was one of Israel, it was one of the 10 tribes, people had their territory entirely surrounded by Judah. Now, this is interesting if you take a look at the map of the Holy Land. Yes, they're totally encircled by Judah. And it has basically, Simeonites have basically no Bible history. Now, what is interesting, what became of the large portion of the tribe of Simeon, that seems that they have disappeared from the wilderness. They obviously didn't enter the Holy Land because their number significantly dropped from when they left Egypt and before Israel inherited the Holy Land. And it says, this author says, it's perhaps the hardest trail of all to follow. It is suggested that those Simeonites formed the Celt-Iberian migration, which moved westward from the Levant about the 15th century before Christ and settled in Brittany, Belgium, Wales, Devonshire, part of Cumberland, and part of Cornwall. These people are sometimes called the Simoni in classical atlases, and if so, they formed the third Israel colony to be to find. So this Celto-Iberian migration that we all are aware about might have been caused pretty much by Simeonites not really entering the Holy Land, but just inhabiting large portions of Europe, Belgium, Britain, Wales, Devonshire, Cumberland, and so on. So that's basically what we have about Simeon. What else is recorded in about Simeon is in Joshua chapter 19 and verse 1. It says that their inheritance was within the inheritance of the children of Judah. So that's their, shall we say, second lot. What was basically inherited by Simeonites were 17 cities and the surrounding villages, and that's what is mentioned in Joshua chapter 19, verses 2 through 8. And that's basically what we have about Simeon, and there are indications, again, that various Simeonites today are inhabiting Scotland, and that they're very much mixed with the house of Judah, because many Jews crossed the sea from Denmark, from Jutland, and then they mixed with Scottish people. Now we come to Levi. Now Levi, again, it is prophesied in Genesis chapter 49. It was Jacob's prophecy in the last days. And as we have already read, it says that Levites, they have instruments of cruelty in their habitations. Now this is interesting. And then Jacob further says, O my soul, come not into their secret, unto their assembly mine honor be not thou united, Old King James. For in their anger they slew a man, and in their self-will they dig down a wall. Now, of course, there is something to be said about anger in Proverbs chapter 25, verse 28. And but I'm just mentioning this as a passing reference. What Jacob else says, he says, Cursed be their anger, for it was fierce, and their wrath, for it was cruel. I'll divide them in Jacob and scatter them in Israel. And that's what really was fulfilled. Later we can read in Numbers chapter 35, verse 1 through 4, and later in Joshua chapter 21, verses 1 through 4, that they were scattered in Israel. We know that Levites never really had their portion of the land. They were scattered to serve all the tribes of Israel, because they were of the priestly family. There are other alternate translations of this, "O my soul, come not thou into their secret." One says, "O my soul, stay away from them. May I never be a party to their wicked plans. For in their anger they murdered a man and maimed oxen just for fun." That's just one of these alternative readings. And one says they destroyed a town wall. Now this is interesting. So these people are warrior people. Now it might come as a surprise to many of our listeners that one city in Europe, it's Liège in Wallonia in Belgium, is renowned for producing firearms. And there is a munition factory in that city, as well as in the city of Herstal in Belgium. There was the world's finest military rifle. It was Springfield SAR 48, and that's the exact model of the Belgium designated FAL LR rifle, and it was one of the world's most honored battle rifles. So it was of a good quality, and it was combat-proven performer. So Liège in Belgium is one of the greater producers of firearms. And Walloons, where the Liège is in the province of Wallonia. So Walloons in this present-day Belgium, they also, some of them settled in Bergslagen area in Sweden in 1620s, and they went to Sweden to help in iron ore industry. And we know from iron you can make all sorts of tools, be that for war or be that for other things. And it is recorded in the history, of course, that the Celts and the other tribes who are obviously descending from Israel began using iron. And that's what advanced basically the man's age and advanced the work on the land and various other facets of human activities. Now also the coal, which makes steel when added to iron, the coal is also the most valuable mineral resource in Wales. So we have Wallonia, we have Wales. Okay, so here we have another part of the world where the Levi's have concentrated in greater numbers. And Wales people are renowned for refining of metal ore, and it's the major manufacturing industry in Wales. Basically almost all the tin plate and much of the aluminium of the steel produced in Britain is basically made in Wales plants. And coal mining, of course, and the manufacture of iron, steel and tin plate are very important trades in Wales. Now also Belgium is also known for that manufacture because the principal manufacturer are iron and steel, and the leading products of the metallurgical industry are iron and steel in Belgium. So we have basically what we have now identity where we have areas that we have identified where the many Levites did settle.
Right.
It is also interesting something else, that among the genetically isolated purest Northern Americans, in the most restricted recent sense, are those with ancestral Welsh surnames, such as Jones, Levis, Owens, and so on. And of course, we could add some other last names very much, probably very well known to all of you in America. It's Levi, Levy, Levin, and there were two great American music talents, Lawrence Welk and Tom Jones. They're both Welsh. And this is interesting, you see, because Levi's were musicians in Israel, and Welsh people are pretty much known for their musical and artistic prowess. It's very amazing to see, the number of individuals who have profoundly artistic tendencies, especially music talents, and you can see that among the Walloons and also in Wales. So the Levi's were the musicians, the main musicians, and that's what we see now in these two ethnic groups, in Walloons and in Wales. Now also anger, wrath, and cruelty. Take a look at
what a combination, right?
Music, what a combination! Music and wrath, yes.
Oh man!
So it is indeed part of the Welsh and Walloon temperament. And let me read you from one of the historical record about the Welsh. Well, Welsh people are philosophically oriented. They enjoy working in small groups. They do not They do not make friends indiscriminately, and once a friendship is formed, it usually lasts a lifetime. Keeping one's word is extremely important to the Welsh. Once an agreement is made, it is kept. Now, as far as Walloons are concerned, the Walloons have a reputation of being spontaneous, quick-witted, and often caustic, that is sarcastic, or skeptical, as well as stubborn and headstrong. Now, what was of course, the trait of all Israel? The characteristic of Israel was stubbornness and stiff-neckedness. And this is very interesting. There is this unbroken oral tradition regarding the identity of the descendants of Levites and the priests within the tribe of Levi, because those priests, called in Hebrew Kohanim, and Levites, they have certain privileges in the synagogue ritual, as we probably know, such as being the first to be called upon to read the Torah, and they're the ones who bless the congregation at the end of services. And there is one wonderful blessing in Numbers, which I believe many of us do know, even by heart. It is in Numbers chapter 6, and it's a beautiful blessing that I often say to myself and to other Israelites, and I wish to convey to all of you. Numbers chapter 6, verse 23. Speak to Aaron and his sons, saying, this is the way you shall bless the children of Israel. Say to them, the Lord bless you and keep you. The Lord make his face shine upon you and be gracious to you. The Lord lift up his countenance upon you and give you peace. So they shall put my name on the children of Israel, and I'll bless them. So this is basically the blessing that Levites were always called upon to close the services with at the synagogues.
Right,
now,
and one other thing too about the Levites, about the Kohanim, is the fact that they're the one group out of all of Israel that can actually point to a DNA record and say this is ours. Because they have that. I'm sure you've heard of the DNA tag that they have. Because they have intermarried so closely and so tightly for so long. That there's a link, and that's an amazing thing. All the rest of us, we all lay claim to being Israelites, but they're the only ones that can really point to something and say this takes us all the way back to the beginning. So it's very interesting. True. But of course, also Abba is the one who will make the final determination, and I trust him implicitly. So I think we'll be all right.
And besides, since all Israel was prophesied it will be scattered into all the nations, then there is no wonder that probably many Levites also lost their identity, which is not proven. Because the Druids, for example, because the festival, if I can call that horrible pagan satanic stuff of last night. I mean, that festival, so-called festival, it is a Druidic really festival, and it goes back to Celtic and Druids and even to the Ireland, and now in America it has got all of these commercial features and all of that horrible stuff. Anyhow, the Druids are also they parallel Levites in many ways. And in fact, even the Druids may be their descendants, you see, because Israel turned to pagan gods. And what is really Halloween and all the other pagan stuff? Well, it's all in honor to sun god, Baal. And so the Levites also obviously, many of them served Baal, many of them didn't, many of them joined Judah and remained faithful to the Yahweh, the God of Israel. But many of them obviously also fell away from the truth. And so the Druids might be their descendants, you see. And it is very clear from the musical talent and from that inclination to keep one words, and from this philosophical orientation of Welsh and Walloons, that they were appropriately named by their mother Leah. In Genesis chapter 29 and in verse 34, it says that Leah bore a third son and said, now this time will my husband be joined unto me, because I have borne him 3 sons. Therefore was his name Levi, Levi meaning joined or attached. Interesting. And something else that Julius Caesar, we have his book even in Serbian. It is translated into Serbian. You have it in English, and it is commentaries on the Gallic Wars. It was written in 57 before Christ, and when he conquered the Belgi, he described those people he found there. Obviously, many of them descendants of Levi. They described them as the most warlike of all Gallic people. Now it's very, very amazing. Yes. Now we also have the toponyms. You see, there is an ancient river in the Belgian area. It was called the Waal River, and this branch of the Rhine in Belgium today is still called Waal River. And there is also Leuven, La Louvière, Vilvoorde, Nivelle, Vlaanderen, They are the old names of the cities and provinces in Belgium. And of course, all those names, they sound a lot like Levi, just as do some other places in Wales, like Colwyd Bay, Amblewich, Clydwyd, Pwllby, Ebb Valley, Holywell. And there is also another town which you may not think about, but it sounds very much like Levi. It's called Liverpool. And Moses prophesied about Levi's, and in Deuteronomy chapter 33, he prophesies about Levi in verse 8 through 11. And Moses prophesies, "Let the Thummim and the Urim be with the Holy One, whom thou didst prove at Massah, and with whom thou didst strive at the waters of Meribah, who said, Wound to his father and to his mother, I have not seen him, neither did he acknowledge his brethren, nor knew his own children, for they have observed thy word and kept thy covenant. They shall teach Jacob thy judgment, and Israel thy law. They shall put incense before thee, and whole burnt offerings upon thy altar. Bless, Lord, his substance, and accept the work of his hands. Smite through the loins of them who rise against him, and of them who hate him, and they rise not again." Now, of course, all of this because of the Levites' zealous anger in the righteous cause, and they redeemed themselves because of they had very zealous anger. They redeemed themselves. It's written in Exodus. We'll read that portion in Exodus chapter 32, verses 25 through 29. Exodus 32 and verse 25. It says, "Now when Moses saw that the people were unrestrained, for Aaron had not restrained them, to their shame among their enemies, then Moses stood in the entrance of the camp and said, Whoever is on the Lord's side, come to me. And all the sons of Levi gathered themselves together to him." Now, that's why, of course, they were redeemed and they were rewarded by God. They were rewarded, and their reward is written in Deuteronomy chapter 10 and verse 8, and it's also written in Malachi chapter 2, verses 4 and 5. We'll just read Deuteronomy chapter 10 and verse 8 says, "At that time the Lord separated the tribe of Levi to bear the ark of the covenant of the Lord, to stand before the Lord, to minister to him, and to bless in his name to this day." And then also we read in Jeremiah chapter 33 and verse 18, it says, "Neither shall the priest, the Levites, want a man before me to offer burnt offerings and to kindle meal offerings, and to do sacrifice continually." And something similar is written in Ezekiel chapter 44 and verse 15. Now also in Deuteronomy chapter 10 we have read verse 8, and in verse 9 it says, "The eternal is his inheritance." Now this was of course fulfilled in type in the right that the Levites have to bear the Ark of the Covenant, and also in their right to care for the items in the tabernacle, because we know that the priests of Aaron, they offered sacrifices. Now these scriptures, of course, in their figurative sense, they imply that modern clergymen and priests and rabbis will have a large percentage of Levites within their ranks, you see. So yes, it's not only among the Jewish people, but obviously also among the lost Israelites. We can speculate at least that because of these prophecies written about Levi, that of course there'll be a large percentage of Levites within their ranks. And when
that's one thing. That's one thing that I've speculated about in my own mind a lot, is the fact that that since our time out, our punishment from Yehovah in terms of exile has been so long, nearly 3,000 years, that the amount of mixing that we have done with the rest of the world, I think, exceeds our wildest notions. I think that the mix is so strong and so great that, like you say, you'll find Levites amongst those who minister in almost any setting. Right. And I think you're absolutely right. I think that's something we need to understand. In fact, for that matter, there's probably a huge chunk of the exiled 10 that have Jewish blood now, in their descendants as well, because of the fact that there are many Jews out here, and there's been a huge amount of intermixing.
That's right. Well, let me point out something else that I think we all know. We all know about the prophecy about the two sticks. And can you remind me where it was? It's in Ezekiel
Ezekiel 30,
chapter
37,
30,
as if you didn't
37.
know.
Right. Yes, I want to read that portion because I kept, well, I went back to that during the Feast of Tabernacles. I delivered a very nice message. We had a very small and lovely group here in Serbia in a very family-oriented Feast of Tabernacles, and I spoke about the book of Ezekiel because, of course, the book of Ezekiel has the prophecy about the second resurrection, about the resurrection of the valley of the old bones, and the resurrection of the entire house of Israel, which is a prototype of the resurrection of all the nations. And
Right.
then as I went through the book of Ezekiel, and I gave some notes about the significance of his work and all of these verses, there is something interesting that you mentioned now about Judah being mixing with Israelites and vice versa.
Right.
So that's that'll be verse 16 in Ezekiel chapter 37, and it says, "As for you, son of man, take a stick for yourself and write on it, for Judah and for the children of Israel, his companions." So here we are. So it is on one stick there is Judah, and yes, we all know that during the evil reign of Israelitish kings of the north, many Israelites migrated south and they joined with Judah. So this is what it is. It says, "For the children of Israel, his companions." And sometimes when I look at some of the Jewish names with like Simeon, their last name Simeon, or Levi, or their other last names, or Dan, and we can of course know that there were other tribes who did mingle with Judah, and even today with Jewish people, they're lost Israelites who are basically consider themselves to be Jews, but they are, of course, part now of the Jewish nation. But this is what it says. It says, "Children of Israel, his companions." So those of the children of Israel who joined Judah, they are now written here on the first stick. And then it says, "Then take another stick and write on it, for Joseph, the stick of Ephraim, and for all the house of Israel, his companions." So for all the house of Israel, it is on another stick. There is Ephraim, leader of the house of Israel, and all the other tribes are written on this stick. And of course, that would imply all the Jewish people who got intermixed with Israel. Yes, the level of scattering and mixing with nations is just amazing. I think it just goes, like you said, beyond our wildest imagination.
Yeah,
because
it. The thing that got me started on that was I have a Restoration Scriptures.
Mm-hmm.
You may have seen that version of the Bible, but one of the things that's mentioned in there is that the passage that is repeated several times in the Old Testament, in Torah particularly, talking about out of your family shall the families of the earth be blessed.
Be blessed, right?
The Hebrew word there is nivrechu, and my understanding is that can also be translated be mixed in.
Mixed in, exactly.
Yeah, and look at this. Yeah. This is exactly what we're talking about. And you know what? I never even thought about the passage you mentioned in Ezekiel 37, and the fact that it says, "And the children of Israel, his companions."
Companions, exactly.
Whoa,
I never thought about it.
Yeah,
exactly. I never thought about that before. So I went back to, as I was preparing I was preparing a sermon on the book of Ezekiel, and I thought, well, while these people are here, let me just give them an overview of the book, because that is so important. Ezekiel, just an amazing book. Sorry for this digression, but I have to point out, I just keep pointing out again and again and again until we all get it. The book of Ezekiel was written for the house of Israel. Ezekiel was set as a watchman over the house of Israel. Ezekiel could not deliver that message to the ancient house of Israel because the very first prophecy, the very first vision that he had was given to him 128 years after Israel was driven out of the Holy Land.
Wow.
And basically, Ezekiel was a prisoner of war because he was in prison with the next to the last king of Judah, and therefore when he began getting his visions, he has 13 visions altogether. When he got his first vision, he couldn't deliver it because he was a prisoner of war. He was in a prisoner of war camp, which means that his message has remained for the modern house of Israel, and that's what we see. Isn't that
Yes.
amazing? We see that first. We see his vision is about the glory of God's throne, and it's quite amazing. And then it goes on in in chapter 5 and verse 6 and chapter 6. It speaks about the total destruction of the modern house of Israel. This is about you, Britain and America, because you are the ones with the birthright, and you're the nations who have inherited the richest material blessings of all the nations on the earth. That was prophesied, and that's because of Jacob and Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob passed on that blessing to America and to Ephraim and Manasseh, which is Britain and America. So in any case, it's talking about the total destruction of those two nations and destruction of all Israel. Then it just proceeds on, talks about the destruction of Judah, destruction and the siege of Jerusalem, and continues to speak about the destruction of Judah. And then it comes, of course, makes an interlude and speaks about the second resurrection, and then it speaks about the temple that will be there in the world to come, which is quite amazing. It's quite another topic that I just stumbled across before the feast, and I began reading a very nice paper on that, and I still have to keep reading because I don't really know much about all those details, which are well written in the book of Ezekiel. So anyway, the Ezekiel is the prophecy for our times, friends. And if you haven't realized that, please realize that, because the modern house of Israel is what is being talked about in the book of Ezekiel. The ancient house of Israel was long gone and was not present in the Holy Land when Ezekiel was given those prophecies. And that's important to understand. His prophecies are for the modern house of Israel. So again, being moved by that information, I just went back to all of these key verses, in the book of Ezekiel. Yes. And little was I surprised when I realized, this never, we talked about it before, the Word of God is still there. It has always been there. It's not the Word of God. It's us getting to understand it better and better as time goes on. I'm like, interesting. Well, we have read this, many times, haven't we?
Yeah, right. And so many things are there. I love the terminology that I've heard used lately. They're hidden in plain sight. Right. They're right there in front of us, and all we have to do is just tweak our understanding so that we see them.
Precisely, or there's probably a plan of God that he has us understand certain things at certain time. He probably has a plan why we shouldn't understand certain things in due course.
And you know what that reminds me of? That reminds me of Daniel. When Daniel's commanded to roll the scroll back up and put it away. Right. In preparation for the right time.
Right, exactly. Yeah. So you see, at the right time, God gives us obviously the right knowledge that we need to know. And then when I went back to these key verses of Ezekiel, basically I went chapter by chapter, pointing out various information there. We can make a whole, here's another idea. I always give you ideas for a new interview. We can have an interview about the book of Ezekiel. So we can just talk about and go through the book of Ezekiel. That will be the most amazing to all the listeners, I'm sure, because it's for our time. Yes. So anyhow, as I went back through the book of Ezekiel, I stumbled across, I came to that verse again, and I'm like, okay, we have read this so many times. And you remember in Jerusalem, when you and I were there back in May, how many times that verse came up over and over again. And I'm like, but it never occurred to me. Look at this little part which says, and his companions. The house of Judah and his companions. Yes, it makes sense, because we know from history that many Israelites did get mixed into with Judah. And some of them are doing that even today. And greetings to all of you who want to convert and think that's your returning to God of Israel. It's probably part of your journey. I'm not judging you. I'm just saying, there was always Israel mixed in with Judah, and so they're mentioned there, right there on that stick. And then on the other stick, they're mentioned all the other tribes, all the 10 tribes. Ephraim and his and all the Israel, which means all the other 9 tribes, and there we are. And the time is coming, my dear friends, when those 2 tribes, those 2 sticks will become one, when the Eternal comes, when the Messiah comes, and he's going to join them together. In the meantime, we are to come closer in appreciation of one another, and if we really love the Torah, and if we really love the Messiah, we're going to be showing affection, brotherly affection, to both houses.
That's
we're
right.
not going to be converting one another, and we
Right.
shouldn't be doing that. We are to love one another, acknowledge one another, accept one another, and realize that this is our common destiny.
Right. Yeah.
It is our common destiny. Mhm.
Would you agree with saying it this way, that we are to prepare ourselves so that when Yehovah gets ready to make the final reunion, make the final merging in His hand, that we will actually love our brothers as we ought to, and therefore make it possible for Him to actually merge us.
Absolutely.
Because I mean, let's
Definitely.
face it. I mean, even now, there is so much mistrust and hatred, and
Mhm.
that's got to go away. We got. I mean, we can't. I really don't think that Yehovah will be happy with us if all we do is treat each other with sort of a nodding kind of acknowledgement, but keep each other at arm's length.
Right, and that's exactly what you and I have seen in Jerusalem in May.
Yes.
We have seen
Yes.
that distrust, not on the
Mhm.
part of the House of Israel. I've seen it on the part of the House of Judah, and I
Yes.
was very much moved with your interview with Rivka, because she's part of that conservative Jewish religion,
Yes.
but she is very open-minded, and she has shown a sisterly love and approach to everybody else. She's not trying to convert anyone.
Right.
She's just showing her kindness to all those who are waking up to their identity, which is wonderful. And I've heard
Yeah.
that I listened to another interview of hers recently, and I heard that her book was, well, it caused quite a stir in Jerusalem, and I'm happy that it did.
That's
But
right.
I do empathize with her, because I can just imagine the sort
Yeah.
of distrust and persecution that she's exposed to. And because of us, the House of Israel, she has stepped out of the
Right.
of her
Right.
comfort zone, and she basically, risked in order to show kindness to us, which is wonderful sacrifice, a wonderful
Yes.
example. And to the House of Israel, that's exactly the good example. Yes,
Right.
we're not out there to convert the House of Judah. It's not the time for that. The time will come when the Messiah they will recognize their Messiah. Keep in mind Zechariah chapter 14. They shall recognize Messiah when he is there. So it's not our job to convert the House of Judah or force all of this rubbish so-called Christianity on the House of Judah.
Right.
It's our time. It is our job of the House of Israel is to prepare ourselves for the return of the Messiah, and then that we will be ready and that we will be prepared to join together with our brother Judah. And yes,
but you are
yes.
right. You are right in terms of the fact of the matter is that everyone is being softened. I mean, I see the Ruach HaKodesh softening hearts all over the place, including many Jewish hearts. And
Right.
I mean, I think that Rivka is a perfect illustration of that, because I'll tell you right now. I mean, I don't know Israel tremendously well, but I know that 5 years ago, if she would have come out with the book that she came out with now, they would have, her husband would have locked her in a closet.
No, I'm sure.
And not let her out to speak about these things in polite public discourse. And yet now, not only is she out there talking about it, but he's supporting her. I mean, it's astounding.
It's marvelous, astounding.
Yeah.
Well, that's exactly what we want. That is exactly what is supposed to be happening in the meantime, before the end of this Achadim. Exactly, that's what's supposed to be happening. I keep remembering there were twin sisters at that conference in Jerusalem. I've forgotten their names, but I will never forget how they stopped me in the hallway to tell me that they saw my reactions to certain things, and that yes, they're from the House of Judah, and they told me, welcome home. They said, don't feel that you're a stranger. You're welcome home. This is your home. We're from the House of Judah. This is your home. And I thought, well, exactly how I felt, when the plane touched the ground in Israel. I knew it to be a deeply emotional stuff. I said to myself, part of you come home, and that's exactly what happened. So yes, I did come home, and we see the softening on the part of the House of Judah, which is marvelous. I take it as a preparation for the final unity that the Eternal is going to do once he has established his eternal kingdom, because all of these passing kingdoms and all of this horrible satanic world which celebrates satanic Halloween has to go away. We cannot have God is not going to tolerate all of you keeping all of that pagan stuff forever and ever, and all of you Israel who are swerving left and right. God is not going to take and to tolerate that for much longer. He's not going to tolerate those Babylonian satanic religions that you, House of Israel, is practicing today. He is not, because he's God. He hates paganism. In all of those horrible pagan festivals, go and read your history. In all those pagan festivals, children, the firstborn children, were being offered to the god Baal and to his cohort Ashtaroth. So just what you do with your Christmas and Easter and Halloween and all of those horrible things, it's all just in order to thank God Baal. God has not forgotten. God has an eternal memory. And you might say, oh, but we have Christianized that. We now celebrate our Lord Jesus Christ. Well, that's your just your ideology, but it is totally wrong. Because God knows exactly. He is a perfect God. He is eternal. And he knows exactly what those days were dedicated to who. And he knows what was happening in those days. You may not know, because, the world doesn't start with you, Christians. The world starts when it was created. And the eternal sanctified only one day as a holy day. It was the seventh day. And the eternal also later, when the house of Israel was established, the eternal also established his festivals, which many of you in Israel just reject to keep, because you're just so much in love with your pagan and with your satanic horrible festivals, of which the worst is the one that you celebrated last night. I'm utterly horrified. I received today a message from Manila, from the Philippines, when a friend of mine just complained to me that even in the capital of the Philippines, the children just went out doing trick and treat. Disgusting.
Yes.
In Serbian culture, I just made a post on my Facebook timeline several hours ago, and I said that all of my kinsmen who kept that American tradition, because it's not even part of Serbian tradition, I said that they all participated unwittingly, whether they're conscious or not, in the most satanic holiday on which thousands of children and adults were offered to Satan that very last night. Do you wonder, you Americans, why do you have so many missing children every year? Do you stop to wonder what happens to those children?
Yes.
Well, of course they offer to Satan. Of course they are. Do you think that Satanism is dead? No, it's well and alive. And it's far worse than all of that fun-making Church of Satan of Anton Shandor Lavey. It was basically a mockery, really, to what is going on. And thousands of children were sacrificed to Satan across the world last night on your most sacred Halloween, on your most sacred satanic festival. And the other one is the May the 1st, the Walpurgian night, disgusting, horrible satanic witch, Sabbath. And that's what you keep. You lost house of Israel. You keep all of those satanic stuff, and you think, oh, but we Christianized that. Well, it doesn't work with God. God knows what is going on. He knows what happened in those days, and God is not going to tolerate you doing that for much longer.
See,
because many of you are obstinate.
Your point is well taken, because one of the things that so many people do not really give a thought to is the fact that syncretism, is absolutely as dirty as pure filth.
Exactly.
I mean, you can, like you say, Christianizing. All that's doing is taking something that they want, they inwardly want to hold on to, even though they know it's evil. Precisely. and they reform it in this. They try to polish it up and wash it up and whitewash it and turn it into something that looks like people might accept it. And when in fact it is still every bit as evil, and the fact that it's a syncretism between the two doesn't change the fact that it is absolutely unacceptable.
Absolutely, and it's in honor to the Lord of the dead, which is, of course, who is the Lord of the dead? God is God of the living, and who is the Lord of the dead? Well, it's Satan, the devil, of course.
Yes, exactly.
And you see, because of your obstinacy, you Americans and British people, it's prophesied in the book of Ezekiel that only 10% of you, Ezekiel chapter 5 and chapter 6, is prophesied that only 10% of you are going to survive the coming great tribulation because of your Satanism. And you're going to have, you'll be suffering the worst national tragedy ever in human history. Your country will be totally destroyed, and your nation, 90% of your nations, will be totally destroyed as well. Now, speaking of Satanism and paganism, let's come to the tribe of Dan, because the tribe of Dan was the first tribe of Israel that officially adopted paganism. Isn't that amazing?
Yes.
So we come to the tribe of Dan, and Dan is primarily, yes, you can find it in Iceland, but primarily you can find it in Ireland. So now this is going to draw much attention because, of course, the current American president is Irish, and plus the first lady from the South Slavic lands, from Slovenia. She speaks my native tongue, so I will often joke that I can speak to your first lady in my native tongue.
Yeah, that's great.
Anyhow,
that's great.
And I could speak to your first president in his native tongue. Anyhow,
right.
Done. So we have in the last days, we go back to Genesis chapter 49 because Jacob is at deathbed and he's now prophesying to all the sons what will happen to them in the last days. And Jacob prophesies for Dan, chapter 49, Genesis, verse 16 through 18. It says, Dan shall judge his people as one of the tribes of Israel. So this is quite amazing. You see, it says, as one of the tribes of Israel. Why does it say that? Because if you remember, who was the mother of Dan? It was Bilhah. Bilhah, she was a handmaid, she was not a wife. So nevertheless, in spite of that, he'll be as one of the tribes of Israel. And then according to Strong's Concordance, it says that Dan shall judge. This word Dan shall judge can also mean to rule or to strive as at law or plead the cause. Quite amazing. Yes. And then the other part of this prophecy says, Dan shall be a serpent, by the way, an adder in the path that bites the horse heels, so that the rider shall fall backward. I have waited for thy salvation, O Eternal. I have waited for thy salvation. This is an amazing prophecy. You see three sentences, but the prophecy is quite amazing when we look at the Irish history and when we also look at some of the biblical facts. Now, in Judges chapter 13, you will find that Samson was a Danite. He was a Danite, and in a sense, in type, he also did judge and avenge his people against the Philistines. It's all written in Judges in chapter 13 through chapter 16. And it's interesting, we know from Samson and his history, there was this guerrilla tactics of warfare. And of course, they were successful for the small against the big and the few against the many. So that was like a serpent that makes a rider fall by biting the horse's heels, you see?
Right.
Because the tribe of Dan was also small, and they were few, and they needed to be cunning. Isn't that amazing? Now, also in sense of rulers, this might come as a surprise to all of you Americans, but the Irish have become judges in disproportionate numbers to their population. Do you know, Americans, that of those who signed the American Declaration of Independence in 1776, 4 were Irish and 9 of Irish descent?
Wow.
And do you know also that Irish Americans feature prominently in all aspects of economic, professional, and political life? And you certainly know that there was a large-scale immigration to Canada and Australia and New Zealand in the 18th and 19th century. And many people of Irish descent have made distinguished contributions to your public life in all spheres of your public life. Perhaps there were even, some of them were even in Australia, the prime ministers. For example, I think there were about, whether there was seven prime ministers that came to power in Australia between 1929 and 1949. Of those 6 were of Irish descent. So it's not only in America, it's also, you see, in Ireland. Also, you might find it interesting that 10 of your early American presidents were of Protestant Northern Irish descent. We talked about Northern Ireland when we talked about the House of Judah.
Right.
And see 10 of your American presidents like Jackson, Polk, Grant, Wilson, Buchanan, Andrew Johnson, Arthur, Cleveland, Harrison, and McKinley. Isn't that amazing? There is also another American president of whom there is much talk today in your public life and also in the world because of the secret files now being opened up. And it's John Fitzgerald Kennedy. He was Irish. And he was, if I remember correctly, he was the first Catholic to be president and probably the only one who was the president of America. And did you also know that?
I've got one question for you too. Because this is starting to really hit home, and that is you're saying that the Irish conflict between Ireland and Northern Ireland was essentially one between Ephraim and Yehuda.
In a sense, yes.
Yeah.
Yes, because a large portion of Jewish descendants have mixed with, especially Northern Ireland. And we did talk about remember we said that Jeremiah, the prophet Jeremiah, brought the princess of the daughter of the last Jewish king to Northern Ireland. And so the throne of David was continued as it was prophesied, and it was a covenant. In fact, God said, I swear by myself to David, I have sworn by myself that there will be always a descendant on the throne of David forever. And that forever, he means forever, because when Jesus Christ, when he comes as the as the rightful ruler and possessor of that throne, he is also, in physical sense, he was descendant of the house of David.
Right.
Isn't that amazing?
Yeah. Abba doesn't miss a lick.
That's right. And also there was another man who was of Irish descent. It's your famous President Ronald Wilson Reagan.
Oh yes.
And also there was another person in your history. It's called Philip Sheridan. He was a son of Irish immigrants. He was the Union cavalry general in the Civil War. Now, in the sense of Irishmen who have pleaded the cause of defendants or plaintiffs by striving at the law, it's quite amazing that many Irish people became lawyers because, you know, they're very highly dramatic and they were favored with oratorical prowess, and many of those young people used their talents very well. And they would read the law with a judge before the days of law school. And many Irishmen also became policemen or judges.
Right.
To such an extent that I think, I'm not sure if it's still in America, but there was a proverbial to associate the name O'Reilly or Malloy Malloy with the neighborhood policeman.
Yeah,
you see,
that's true.
So they were judges and they were applying the law. And perhaps it will be also within this framework of this prophecy to say that the writers can also plead the cause and give a judgment too. And it's quite amazing that Ireland has produced a disproportionately large number of internationally famous authors. You know, like James Joyce, George Bernard Shaw, William Butler Yeats, Oscar Wilde, Samuel Beckett. This is just the top of the list.
Yes.
And it may also be correct, you know, to say that inventors and rulers, well, your current ruler in America is of Irish descent, but it may be correct to say that inventors and rulers or judges are there. This prophecy was fulfilled in a sense that leaders in business are also rulers. And in your history, you have several very successful Irish of the business world. One of them was William Grace. He was the founder of the Grace Steamship Line. And he was also the first Catholic mayor of New York City in 1880. And then there was another one. There was a 20-year-old James Butler. He came to America when he was 20 years old. He organized the first chain store, and his system later spread across the country. Also, there was somebody else from Ireland who was a boy of 14 years. His name was Michael Kudachi, and he took a job in a meat packing plant in Milwaukee and developed a process for curing meat under refrigeration, and he became the head of the Kudachi Packing Company.
Wow.
This is all amazing.
Yeah. You know, one of the things that strikes me as you're saying all this is the realization that when the Irish immigrated to America, they readily absorbed into America, which quite honestly cannot be said for many of the more recent immigrants.
That's right.
There are many people that have immigrated in the last 50 years or so that have done nothing but cause problems and cause dissent. But the Irish came readily and happily and joyously and became part of America without one single objection.
Well, what you just said, what is driving home, your point is driven home by what happened today in New York. Of course, we're one of those immigrants, you know, who obviously came to America with some wrong ideas. But yes, the Irish pretty much contributed to your society in an amazing way. You have a dry goods merchant whose Irish parents lived in Baltimore. He became a banker in Washington, D.C., and he built and gave the nation, your capital, the Corcoran Gallery Art. It's named after him, you see. Yes. And also behind many inventions, there are talents of the Irish. For example, Robert Fulton, he made steam navigation reality. And there was also another Irish immigrant, Cyrus Hall McCormick, and he invented a farm implemented which developed the West. It was a mechanical reaper.
Yes.
And also there was rubber heels. They were invented by Humphrey O'Sullivan. And now something also that is very actual today is hurricane lamp. Do you know that hurricane lamp was invented by Michael Hicks?
Really?
Yes,
wow.
That's right.
Man, you really researched this.
Well, thankfully, you know, the professionals know where to find their information. And I'm speaking all of this because you see, now you realize, just like we said, how the prophecy about the house of Israel are far-reaching and much deeper than what we might think at first, you see. And I'm illustrating this because many people don't realize how important these things are. Yes. You know, and there has been, when I was at the feast, there was a lovely gentleman of 70 years. He's from the Netherlands. He did complain to me, and he said, there has been much talk about Ephraim and Manasseh, which is great, but nobody speaks about the origin of the Dutch people, of Zebulun. So I promised, I said, if God willing, some of us might come over to Holland and we might just speak to the Zebulun about their origin, to the Dutch people.
Yes.
And in one of our interviews, one of our future interviews, we'll speak about the Dutch people and their origin. They're also...
I interviewed a gentleman just earlier this week on Monday, whose name is Ariel van Kessel.
Oh, okay.
And he is a Jew who lives in Jerusalem, but for a very long time during his youth, he thought he was an Ephraimite. He didn't know he was a Jew. Right. And so when he found out that he was a Jew, yes, he converted to Judaism, and yes, he moved to Israel, but he still loves Ephraim and still advocates for Ephraim.
Certainly. Well,
and that's the deal. That's the kind of thing. That's the perfect combination of someone that can actually stand up and say to both sides, "I love you both. Let's get this together. Let's do it right."
Well, if you remember my speech in Jerusalem, that's exactly what I said. I said, There is nothing much that I love on this earth as you, both houses, and because I love you, I have to tell you a few things.
That's right.
That I didn't like.
A loving father administers punishment.
Right. I said I have, a few things I've been tormented by what I heard in the last 2 days. So first to you, my brother Judah, and then to you, all lost Israel, and then I just delivered a speech of Dan. I'm just
yes.
I of course I shortened it very much. I had more information that I could give in that speech, but I'm thankful that you always give me a couple of hours, so I can just say much more. So this is how important it is. You see, we see from what we see in about the Irish people, we see that Dan has judged and ruled his people in politics, the legal profession, literature, law enforcement, business, and inventions. And so Rachel, his mother, was very correct when she said, it's in Genesis chapter 30 and verse 6, she said, God has judged me and has heard my voice and has given me a son, therefore called she his name Dan. But how have the Irish been a serpent by the way, another in the path that bites the horse heel, so that the rider shall fall backward? That's the prophecy as well. Well, Dan, what happened was that Dan introduced idolatry in the land. And it was introduced on a regular official basis. If you take a look at, please, Judges in chapter 18, you can find that in Judges in chapter 18, verses 30 and 31. So it was Dan who just led all these tribes into idolatry. And I think even today, or perhaps in ancient Jewish literature, a designation of idolatry, they use the term Dan, quite rightly.
Yes.
So in Judges, that will be in Judges 18. While I'm turning there, let me just say that it was also in Dan that Jeroboam, the first apostate king of Israel, it was Jeroboam who led the rebellion that culminated in the divided kingdom. In Dan, he set up one of the two golden calves. And we won't turn there, but it's written in 1 Kings chapter 12 and verse 28 through 30. So it was in Dan, one of the calves that was set up for all the Israel to go and worship Baal.
Wow.
And furthermore, what else was there? Well, in that's why I want to read Judges chapter 18. There was something interesting because you can find parallel between the Irish people today and the tribe of Dan as well in this. It says, Judges chapter 18, verse 30, Then the children of Dan set up for themselves the carved image, and Jonathan the son of Gershom, the son of Manasseh, and his sons were priests to the tribe of Dan until the day of the captivity of the land. So you see, throughout the history of Israel until the captivity of the land, the tribe of Dan was totally idolatrous. Verse 31, So they set up for themselves Micah's carved image, which he made all the time that the house of God was in Shiloh. Now, Dan had a Levite priest, so-called priest, who was also called a father. Look at verse 19 in chapter 18. Verse 19 says, And they said to him, Be quiet, put your hand over your mouth, and come with us. Be a father and a priest to us. Now, who is today the father and the priest to Irish people? We all know that they're staunch Catholics, except for the Northern Ireland, which has a mixture of Catholics and Protestants. But we know that Irish people are staunch Catholics. In fact, they're one of the staunchest Catholic nations in the world. It is better for you to be a priest to the household of one man, or that you be a priest to the tribe and a family in Israel. So yes, even to this day, the one tribe of Israel, the Dan, is staunchly Catholic, which is very much unlike the other tribes of Israel, who are basically Protestant.
Wow, I never thought of that. I never thought of that.
Think about that. All the house
know,
of Israel is basically Protestant.
Then that makes me think to myself, I wonder if that maybe isn't the root of Dan being omitted from some of the listings of the tribes.
That's right. Yes, you're getting to the point.
Wow.
Yes, they're omitted in genealogies exactly because of that. Because they were the first and they were just staunchly, a pagan. They celebrated their Halloween, Americans. That's your Halloween, which you commercialized, and now you're spreading all over the world. And I said to the Serbian youth, this afternoon on my timeline in English, I said, I'm an American student and I'm an English teacher, but I'm utterly disgusted by this American custom that has been spreading all over the youth. And I said, well, why don't you just go full way? Just go all the way. Why don't you go and do trick and treat? Of course, you don't do that at Serbian youth because it will be shameful. It's not part of Serbian tradition. But I said, why don't you just go the full, just go the whole way? And then I scolded them. I said, why don't you copy some other good things from the American society? There are many good things in American society. Many good things that you can copy. It would be wonderful. It will be a total regeneration of our society if we copied some good stuff from the American society. But no, people don't want to copy your good stuff from America. They just want to copy all of those horrible things. Paganism, pornography, and shallow materialism. That's what your Hollywood is being exporting to all of the nations around the world. Anyhow, verse 20. So the priest's heart was glad, and he took the ephod. So you see the whole cult of paganism is being established in Dan. So he took the ephod, the household idols, and the carved image, and took his place among the people. And here we have the Pope, the currently very popular Pope Francis, of course, the ecumenical leader, and he is basically loved by the Irish as their father and their priest. So you see, it's interesting. History, when you understand the Bible, you will understand the history. You can even understand the current things happening.
Right.
So the tribe of Dan had this Levi priest, who was also called the father, and he was dressed in an ephod, as we have read, and he used idols in worship. And even today, as I said, 95% of the population of Ireland basically Roman Catholics, staunch Roman Catholics. And we also see the serpent and adder symbolism. There is an allusion of guerrilla warfare and evil rebellion. Now, if you know anything about the Irish history, those of our listeners from Britain, if there are any out there, and I hope there are, they will certainly know more about that, because Irish history is full of violence of that kind. Because you remember, the Irish liberation for British rule was basically marked by numerous rebellions. For example, there was this Easter Rebellion on Monday, April 24th, 1916, when Sinn Féin became the most influential political party in Ireland. And then 3 years later, the members of the parliament, they assembled in Dublin, proclaimed the independence of that country, and then there came the guerrilla attacks by Irish militants, and they were later called the Irish Republican Army. They attacked British forces, and that just lasted until 1921. There was a truce in 1921, and then that ratification of a peace treaty brought into being the Irish Free State. But, however, the insurgencies just continued, and there was an increase in violence between Protestants and Catholics in Northern Ireland. And then that was followed by IRA terrorist activity in the Irish Republic. And basically in the late 70s and the early 90s, the Irish government faced increased domestic terrorism, and that resulted in large part from the collapsing of representative government in Northern Ireland, and then the British reimposed their rule. So anyhow, there is this bloody history between British and Irish, which also proves the origin of the Irish people. Now, you mentioned that the Dan is often missed, or there is one case in Numbers chapter 10, verse 25, Dan is often listed last in any tribal listings, you see. This is quite interesting. So he's either missed, omitted, or he's listed as last. And there is this prophecy says, I have waited for thy salvation, O Eternal. Now this refers in type to the fact that the tribe of Dan was the last to receive its inheritance in the promised land.
Right.
And those of you who want to read that, it's in Joshua chapter 19 and verse 47 through 49. Dan was the last to inherit the land. And now Dan is also omitted in the genealogies in First Chronicles chapters 2 through 10, and he is also absent from the 144,000 sealed and protected from the day of the Lord in Revelation chapter 7. And some people wondered about that. Well, yes, the tribe of Dan is only one that is not mentioned there, and this is all because of Dan's idolatry and because of Dan's treacherous guerrilla warfare. In fact, just, as anciently the Assyrian invasion to the modern Israel, it came through Dan. Because in Jeremiah chapter 8, there is interesting two verses, verse 16 and 17. It says, the snorting of his horses was heard from Dan, for they are come and have devoured the land and all that is in it, the city and those that dwell in it. For behold, I will send serpents, cockatrices among you, which will not be charmed, and they shall bite you, says the Eternal. So the invasion into the ancient house of Israel came through Dan. Now it is very possible, listen to this one, it is thus very possible because Irish are staunchly Catholic, and they're very loyal to the current European Union, which is being involved into the United States of Europe, which we know, those of us who know the prophecy, we do understand that the United States of Europe, led by Germany, is going to destroy Britain and America and destroy them as nations. So it is very possible that the Irish people are going to betray the English to the Europeans.
Wow.
And it's very possible that even the invasion to England might come through Ireland. Perhaps I've read it some time ago. There was the Irish Nazi Party, believe it or not, and they already had a plan in the Second World War to allow Hitler to conquer England through Ireland. Now, it didn't work out the first time, but of course, it may well work out in the war to come. That's interesting because there is also another scripture in Judges chapter 5, verse 17, which says that Dan remained in ships. Basically, the tribe of Dan, most of them didn't really fall into the Assyrian captivity. So that gives us indication that in this future development, Dan is not going to really be captured or enslaved by Assyrians or the modern Germans, but that they will actually be allies to the modern Germans, helping and aiding slavery.
Wow.
The much hated English people. They hate
against their own brothers.
Against their own brothers. Well, there is no hatred as strong as, I guess, among the brothers. It's just amazing, but that's true.
Yes.
It's horrible to say, but that's true. Now, also there is Moses prophesied about each tribe, except for the tribe of Simeon, in Deuteronomy chapter 33. And in verse 22, the Moses says, Dan is lion's whelp, he shall leap from Bashan. Now, this also occurred in type because, the Danites didn't have enough land to inherit. So in Judges chapter 18, the Danites sought an inheritance to dwell in, and so they made a leap from the northern Bashan area, and they attacked Laish, like a lion's whelp. It's described in Judges chapter 18. And then they changed the name of that place of Laish to Dan. It says in 18 verse 29. And later on, Dan made another leap from Bashan. They leapt to Greece, to Spain, to Ireland, and Denmark. Do you realize that the word Denmark is named, it's the mark of Dan. It's named after Dan. And of course, on their way to Denmark through the continent, some of them went to the continent, but many Danites dwelled on the ships, as Judges chapter 5 says, and they basically sailed away as the Assyrian ancient invasion came onto the land of Israel. Now, it's interesting that the Greek, you mentioned Greece, yes, that's true. There is a group of people called Danaoi in Greek history. So the Greek Danaoi are basically the Irish Tuatha de Danaans. And we also see various other toponyms of Dan, like in Dunslow, Dunsover, Dunmonism, Dundalk, Dundrum, Donegal Bay, Donegal City, Dunglow, Londonderry, Dingle, Dungarvan, Dunsmore, the Don River in Scotland. There is one in England. There is also a river in Doon in Scotland. So we have all of these traces, all of the marks, waymarks by which Dan migrated to British Islands. So some of those marks are left on the continent, like Danube, It was called Ishtar before it was called Danube. And there are other marks on the continent, but there are also other marks along the coast of the Mediterranean, and particularly when you look at the map of Ireland, there are plenty of Dans in the names of their cities. This is quite amazing. Now back to the ancient history. When you see 2 Kings chapter 15 and verse 20, there is description of Tiglath-Pileser, the Assyrian king, invading northern Israel. That's in 741 before Christ. And there is no mention of Dan being invaded. And that's quite interesting because that indicates that they migrated by sea. What is mentioned in 2 Kings chapter 15 is Naphtali, Gilead, and Galilee. They're all mentioned, but not the tribe of Dan. So those who dwell on the ships, they just sailed away, many of them. And of course, they sailed away around Mediterranean, and then they founded the colony, their colony on the Irish, on Ireland. And later to that colony came Prophet Jeremiah along with the princes of the last Jewish king. So the Irish king and the Jewish princess, they were reunited in marriage. They were married on the hill Tara, or perhaps Torah. And all the Irish kings and all the Irish sovereigns were crowned on the hill Tara. That's quite interesting, isn't it? We do have a mountain in Serbia called Tara, very famous for its beauty. I wonder where does it get its name? Who knows?
Yes.
There was also, speaking of these various toponyms and the marks of Dan, there was also a large town of Cappadocia. It was called Dana. And there was this river Danapris. It's called now Dnieper. And that's a name given, of course, to the river where the tribes of Israel were exiled. They were around the Black Sea. And we have Danube emptying itself into the Black Sea. And in fact, the capital of Serbia, Belgrade, lies on the river Danube. There is a confluence of the famous Balkan river Sava, which empties itself into Danube. So on the confluence of Sava and Danube is Belgrade, and the valley of Danube in Belgrade is the most beautiful because the Danube flows through 8 countries. But the valley of Danube, the banks of Danube are the most beautiful in Serbia. And the tourist organization of Serbia they put a YouTube record. They taped the valleys of Danube, and if you just look at that, it's breathtaking, it's amazing. And that's exactly through that valley that all the 10 tribes of Israel migrated to northwest and populated northwest Europe. There is also interesting in what is written in history is there is a son of Belus and Anihoe, Danaus, and after his father's death, he reigned conjointly with his brother Aegyptus on the throne of Egypt, and soon after there was a difference that arose between them, and the Danaus sailed away, and he arrived safe to the coast of Peloponnesus, which is the famous coast in Greece, and he was hospitably received by Gelanor, king of Argos. Now I mentioned the Danube River. Danube River used to be called Ishtar, after that pagan goddess Easter that also called Christianity celebrates today. Now Dan moved to Egypt, you see, when it happened to Egypt, when Israelites were coming to Egypt. In Genesis chapter 46 and verse 23, it is recorded that Dan, the father of the tribe of Dan, he moved to Egypt with one son. His son was called Hushim, and his name was also known in the scriptures as Shuham. That second name is recorded in Numbers chapter 26 and verses 42 and 43. Now, 2 of Shuham's descendants were called Danaus and Cadmus. And Greek history comes in place here because the Greek history tells us that Danaus and Cadmus, they fled from Egypt, so they didn't enter the Holy Land. They fled from Egypt and they arrived in Greece at the same time as the exodus of Israelites under Moses from Egypt. This is quite interesting. This is from History of the World, from Petanius. Now, Fasti Hellenici, which is a Greek chronology, it says that Cadmus' expedition occurred 310 years before the fall of Troy. And Troy fell in 1183 before Christ, which means that 1493 before Christ, they arrived in Greece, which is the very year or somewhere around the Exodus, or very near the Exodus. Isn't that amazing? So yes, many of Danites did not go into the promised land. And obviously there was a rift, as we mentioned, between Moses and Simeonites. So many Simeonites didn't go into the promised land either. Now, it's also confirmed by Hecataeus of Abdera in 6th century before Christ that the most distinguished of the expelled foreigners from Egypt, they followed Danaus and Cadmos into Greece, but the greater number were led by Moses into Judea. So not all Israelites that left Egypt went into the promised land. Diodorus Siculus, he writes in his history book that the aliens were driven from the country, and the most outstanding and active among the banded together, as some say, were cast ashore in Greece and certain other regions. Their leaders were notable men, chief among them being Danaus and Cadmus. But the greater number were driven into that which is now called Judea, which is not far distant from Egypt and was at that time utterly uninhabited. The colony was headed by a man called Moses, outstanding both for his wisdom and for his courage. So again, not all Israelites went into the promised land. And as we said, the sea voyage, it was a no big problem for Danite people, because they were a seafaring people, and they, as it says in Judges chapter 5, they abode in ships. But you see, the rest of the Danites went to Judea with Moses. But many of them didn't go to Judea. Many of them fled. And later, many of them, during the Assyrian invasion, didn't wait for the invasion, but they fled also on the ships. When those who went into the Holy Land, they received a very small allotment of the land. That was their inheritance. And that was quite inadequate for their needs. So Joshua basically gave them permission to expand beyond the borders of Canaan. And this is where Dan walked out of the Bible history. Because what they did, they went up the Jordan Valley, and they settled first at Laish, whose name they changed into Dan. And that's what they did. They kept changing the names of the toponyms on their way, on their migration to Northwest Europe. So that's how they changed Ishtar, the river Ishtar's name, into the name Danube. And then they were in Laish, and after a while they moved on to Smyrna, and then they moved to Greece. And this is how they marched out of Bible history, because we know that God's eyes are settled, and that God's eyes are set on the Holy Land. And the Bible is the record of the Holy Land. So when God takes people out of his sight, as it says in the Bible, that phrase simply means away from the Holy Land. Now again, most of the Danites later, those who were in the Holy Land, they didn't go into the Assyrian captivity, and the bulk of that tribe that left the Holy Land before the time of Jeroboam II, bulk of them left the Holy Land because they do not appear in genealogy of 1 Chronicles chapter 5. So as the tribes of Israel were successively invaded, many of the Danites didn't wait to be conquered. Now, what happened to those who left the Holy Land? Well, those Danites, this might be a surprise to some, they attacked their kinsmen. Their kinsmen were the Zerahites, and the tribe of Zerah established the city of Troy. We talked about that when we talked about the house of Judah and the Jews in the Bible. And what did these Danites? They attacked Troy, and they basically fought the Trojan War. So the Trojan War was again a conflict between the house of Judah, you might say, and the house of Israel, right? You see how history repeats itself.
Yes.
It's just amazing. So what happened with those Danites? They, of course, conquered the Troy, and they became the ruling people in the country of Greece. And they were the Danai, which are mentioned in Homer's Iliad and Odyssey. And the name Danai, that was the name given to the people of Argos in Greece, and they were also globally given to all the Greeks from Danaus, their king. So the great Greek philosophers were Irishmen. Isn't that amazing?
Wow.
And the Greek classics were histories about the Irish. Of course, later they left Greece, and Herodotus tells us that here we come to the Lacedaemonians, or the Spartans.
Right.
It is Herodotus. And he writes that in his day, Spartans were the most powerful and eminent branch of the Dorian Greeks. And he also writes that the Lacedaemonians, or Spartans, were the most learned of the Greeks. He also says that they wore a linen tunic with a fringe hanging around the legs, and their religious customs forbid wearing wool in a temple. They have no dealings with strangers. The Lacedaemonians were kindred with the house of Heracles in Sparta, who was Samson the Danite. So you see, they deified Samson the Danite and make him Heracles in Sparta. Now, something that is very easily very veritable, it's in 1 Maccabees chapter 12. In 1 Maccabees chapter 12, which is a historical book, it is a true book. It's not part of the inspired canon of the Bible, but nevertheless, the Maccabees, the book of Maccabees, are a historical book, and they're historically true. So in 1 Maccabees chapter 12, Jonathan, the high priest, wrote to the Lacedaemonians. And he says, there were letters sent in times past unto Onias, the high priest from Darius, who reigned then among you, to signify that you are our brethren, as the copy here underwritten does specify. We therefore at all times without ceasing, both in our feasts and other covenant days, do remember you in the sacrifices which we offer, and in our prayers, as reason is, and as it becomes us to think upon our brethren. Now, isn't that amazing? Because you see, what Jonathan did, he enclosed a copy of those earlier letters, and the earlier letters which were received by Onias from Lacedaemonians. This is what the letter says. Arius, king of the Lacedaemonians, to Onias, the high priest, greeting. It is found in writing that the Lacedaemonians and Jews are brethren, and that they are of the stock of Abraham. Now therefore, since this is come to our knowledge, you shall do well to write unto us of your prosperity. We do write back again to you, that your cattle and goods are ours, and ours are yours. We do command therefore our ambassadors to make report unto you on this wise. So here we have a link between Sparta and the house of Judah. And in the history of Ireland, written by Moore, it says that Irish bards, they say that the Tuatha de Danann, after sojourning sometime in Greece, they set sail for Ireland. And the Psalter of Cashel confirms this by saying, the Tuatha de Dananns ruled in Ireland for about 2 centuries and were highly skilled in architecture and other arts from their long residence in Greece and their intercourse with the Phoenicians. And another interesting part, Gladstone's Juventus Mundi, it testifies that the Tuatha de Danann of Ireland came from the Danai of Greece. And some Phoenicians also came to Ireland and they settled the south of that country. Now, perhaps even certain Irish today claim descendants from Phoenicians. And truly, they are mentioned as Fenians. And Fenians, that's the part of Spain. It was conquered by the Phoenicians, and it was called Ais Faine in the Chronicles of Eri. So, yes, there was this migration going through the Iberian Peninsula, and I hope with this information on the tribe of Dan that, and on Irish people, I hope that our listeners have learned a lot about the
well, you learn that the intermixing is not only between people in terms of marriage and stuff, but cultures. Man,
exactly.
The cultures are so intermixed that only Yehovah will be able to divide everything up.
But speaking of cultures, now let's get back in the time remaining, just to because we are just right after the most satanic of all celebrations. Let's go back to that topic, because that celebration was very popular in Ireland. And with Irish immigrants, it also came to America, and now it's spreading worldwide. Yes, it's an American custom, but many people don't realize it originated from Europe. One thing that I want to, I'll just use the opportunity to read some stuff and quote and speak about some shocking things about Halloween, because it's a sun worship. And it's hated by God. There is nothing that God abhors more than the Baal and Ashtaroth worship in the Bible. I want to draw attention of our listeners to a book written in 1990 by a lady called Ruth Edna Kelly. Kelly, K-E-L-L-E-Y. Now, that book is probably long forgotten in your history because it was written in the last century. But this book is written in a very nice way, and it's very informative. It's called The Book of Halloween. And because it was written in the last century, 1990, it's now in the public domain, and all of you listening to this can easily find it and download it from internet. I think once I even stumbled across audio files. You can even listen to it while you are driving somewhere, or going about your business. Because it is important, you see, because she speaks about sun worship in chapter 1, the sources of Halloween. In chapter 2, she speaks about the Celts, their religion and festivals. And then in chapter 3, she speaks about Samhain. In chapter 4, she speaks about Pomona, the Roman goddess of fruits, and how those various customs integrated and amalgamated into one. And then she speaks about the coming of Christianity, All Saints, All Souls. Then she speaks about, in chapter 6, origin and character of Halloween omens. Then she speaks about Halloween beliefs and customs in Ireland, in Scotland and the Hebrides, in England and the Isle of Man, in Wales, in Brittany and France. Then she speaks about Teutonic religion. She speaks about witches. She also speaks about Walpurgis night. And she speaks about Halloween in America, written in 1990. Very nice. It's in public domain. You can download it. You have no excuse, the House of Israel, for continual worship of Baal. Just as I wrote today on my timeline on Facebook, even to Serbian people, I said, there is no excuse for anyone to say that I didn't know. You can know, but you don't want to know. Now that's another story. And various Serbian individuals did contact me and say they thanked me for having this outspoken attitude against Halloween. And one young lad, he admitted, he said, I have learned about this primarily through being informed through your timeline. And there are various others who also shared my post in both English and Serbian, because I have to speak against this. How can I be an Israelite and not speak against this horrible satanic custom? Because it is my forefathers and your forefathers who basically substituted, and the tribe of Dan was the leading tribe, they substituted the true worship of Yahweh, Yehovah, of the true God of Israel, with all of these pagan and satanic customs, which have nothing to do with Christianity. Oh, you can say with Christmas, yeah, it has the name Christmas. With Easter, you can say, but it has Christmas customs. Okay, well, it's not true, but fine. But what about your Halloween? What is Christian about Halloween? What is so hollow? What is so sacred about the Halloween? Absolutely nothing. And in this book, I just read several chapters this afternoon, as I wanted just to mention some things to you. You know, the Druids, we mentioned the Druids, they derived their name from the Celtic word Druid, means sages, and it's connected with the Greek word for oaks, because you know that they had their ceremonies being conducted in oaks, in oak groves, and of course their ceremonies were permeated with magic. Now, Julius Caesar, we mentioned Julius Caesar about writing about the Druids, and Caesar provides us with information that the chief god of Druids and of all the Celts were Baal.
Right.
And you know, they believed, the Druids and the Celts believed that the sun was the visible emblem of Baal, and they represented Baal by lowlier tokens such as circles and wheels. And you have the trefoil. It was changed into a figure composed of 3 winged feet radiation from a center. Now that's being now Christianized, and now it's so-called Trinity. Do you know, all of you great Christians, that the cross also was a symbol of the sun? It was the appearance of its light shining upon a dew or stream. This is what this lady Edna Kelly is writing in this book.
Yes, and it's also indicative of exactly how far afield Christianity went. Of course, Christianity never has been really where it belongs, but I mean, it's so far afield now with when you look at Constantine, for instance. You know, Constantine. You know, Christians revere Constantine as being one of the primary leaders in the early days of Christianity, but he was a sun worshiper from day one to day Z. He was always a sun worshiper.
Well, yes, and there's plenty of.
His coin said, you know, Sol Invictus.
That's right, and he was the one who legalized paganism. And speaking of Constantine is a prototype of the coming European dictator. He is going to be coming from the Roman Catholic fold. He'll most likely modify Roman Catholic religion, because considering all those false omens and false wonders that he's going to make, obviously it will be outside of the even of the realm of the Roman Catholicism. It will be probably some sort of ecumenical amalgamation. But in any case, what happened with Constantine, many people know, oh, supposedly he gave freedom to Christians. Well, you're all totally deceived, all of you Christians who think that, because he gave freedom to false Christians. All the true Christians who wanted to stick to the Torah, and those Christians who wanted to keep the Ten Commandments and the holy days of God and the Shabbat, they were all expelled from the Roman Empire. They were either murdered or they just held to flee outside of the realm of the Roman Empire. And that's how you had all of these Paulicians and people in Armenia and people in Asia Minor. They all just fled from Constantine's persecutions. And he legalized paganism. In fact, Halloween became a subject of becoming legal. I read that in this wonderful book of Ruth Edna Kelly. It became a subject of that in the 4th century. Now, who was reigning in the 4th century and who was giving freedom to false Christianity? It was Constantine. Now, Constantine wasn't the one who really cared about Halloween. He more cared about Sunday and Easter. But nevertheless, his legislation against the law of God is exactly the prototype of what is the European legislation going to be very soon. Now listen to me, the house of Israel. Soon it is going to be outlawed. Shabbat keeping will be outlawed. And who is the leading country? And what is the leading country in Europe? You see, some people in Jerusalem misunderstood me. When one lady approached me and she said, oh, I love the Torah, we keep the Torah in Germany. And I asked her very plainly, without any malicious hindsight, I said, are you prepared to die for what you believe? Yes. She looked at me strangely. I repeated my question. She speaks German. That's her native tongue. So I thought she might not have understood English, and my English is not perfect either. So I thought, okay, let's repeat the question. But obviously she misunderstood. She thought that I was putting Germany down. No, I'm not putting Germany down, Torah keepers. I'm just telling you what is going to happen. Out of the Germany, or out of German nationality, will rise a new Constantine. And Constantine legalized paganism, Satanism. And by the force of the law, if you didn't want to keep Sunday, you were gone. You would be dead. If you didn't want to keep pagan Easter, you would be dead. So that's what I'm telling you. All of you Torah keepers in Europe and elsewhere. Because Europe is going to become a world empire. Roman Empire was a world empire, and Europe is basically the last resurrection of the so-called Holy Roman Empire. It was always Germanic, and it was always Roman Catholic. And at one point, forget about this, talk about the human rights and all of that rubbish, it's not going to work. Because the Bible says it's not going to work. The Bible prophesies that it's going to come, the darkest period in human history is called the Great Tribulation. And in that time, a new Constantine is going to implement a totalitarian rule, and nobody is going to be tolerated. Whoever wants to keep the Torah will not be tolerated. And because the free nations like America and Britain are going to be conquered by Europe, and because it's going to be a world empire aligned with all the others in the world, there will be no way that you can get away with, perhaps in some isolated island, perhaps, but there is no way that you can be unbothered and continue keeping Torah, especially if you're in Germany and Europe and America and Britain. There is no way. So a new Constantine is on the way. A new Constantine, because you remember the cross, how did the cross become Christianized? Well, with Constantine, supposedly he had a vision of the cross, and he had that vision. In vision it says, you shall conquer in this sign. You see, but the cross, its light shining upon the dew of stream, making to the half-closed eyes little bright crosses. That's how the cross really, that's really the origin of the cross. And it was far before Constantine, but it became legalized with Constantine. Constantine, the sun worshipper. And of course, to Baal, what was, Constantine didn't sacrifice anybody directly to Baal. He forbade paganism, supposedly, but he continued the sun worship. And the Baal sacrifices of criminals, of prisoners of war among the Celts were done to Baal. So again, what is prophesied in the Bible? It's legalization of so-called Christianity. A new Constantine, a new Hitler is on the way. And those of you who don't know, the Assyrians, the ancient Assyrians, they're ancestors of the modern Germans and Austrians. And we talked about this already once, and I gave a very clear Bible-based warning to you, America and Britain, because of your paganism, because of your Halloween, and I did stress Halloween. But now, after the Halloween, just stop for a moment and please think about it. You have no excuses. Because as I said, the book of Halloween, written in 1990, tells you how satanic that is. Now, speaking back to Constantine, so a new leader, a new European leader is going to rise. And European power is not going to tolerate, it is not going to tolerate Torah keeping. Those of you who live in Germany, please take note of the, I think it's Article 129. Don't hold me exactly what the article is, but take a look at your constitution. I think you call it by a different name. It's called Basic Law or something like that. Article 129 gives a special protection to Sunday. So Sunday is already in legislation in Germany. Already right now in Germany on Sunday, will you find any stores open? Will you find people working in Germany on Sunday? Or in Austria, you won't. And there was even I think there was a referendum being held, whether it was in Poland or Hungary, perhaps even in Croatia, that all the shops and stores and businesses should be closed on Sunday. So that's not yet strictly enforced, but the time is coming when it will be. And in the Great Tribulation, which will obliterate the house of Israel, and the remnant of the house of Israel, the 10% of all of you house of Israel, there will be nevertheless millions of you, millions will start their trek to the Holy Land because they have to return to the Holy Land. It's the second Exodus. We have to speak about that. I have some important information for all of you to hear, the house of Israel, for all of us to hear, to know, to understand. Yes, the second Exodus is there in the Bible, but many of you don't even understand the scope and the magnitude of that event. Just like you know that the house of Israel is there in the Bible, but look what you have learned, what we have learned tonight, what we have learned in this interview, how much we have learned about the Irish people, about Wallonia, about Wales, you see. See, there is much more in the Bible than sometimes what we see. So there is much more about the second Exodus of Israel. Back to the Constantine. Constantine is the prototype of the last Hitler. And the last Hitler will be assisted as the first beast in Revelation chapter 13. He will be assisted by his false prophet, which will be the head of the Roman Church, whether it will be this current Pope or any other, it doesn't really matter. But this one, the first beast, the coming European ruler, he is going to enforce paganized Christianity by law. And whoever is not going to submit is going to be murdered. So be prepared, all of you Torah keepers who are just full, you have full mouth of Torah and love for the Messiah. Well, be prepared to die. Be prepared to die, because that's what is happening. And unless you're prepared to give your life for that, many of you are going to give up on your faith. As simple as that. There'll be concentration camps for the house of Israel and for the Torah keepers. Just like what happened to the Jewish people, nothing is going to have to be different. This time is going to be only much more horrible, because there is a Holocaust coming on the house of Ephraim. And only 10% of the house of Israel is going to survive. So this coming European ruler is not going to tolerate your human rights and your freedom of religion, because Roman Catholic Church has never been tolerant anyway, has never tolerated really the difference, and never will. So this coming European and Roman Catholicism is a European religion, basically. Most of you in America, your ancestors fled from European dictatorship. But this time they're going to conquer your land and take you captive and destroy you. Before that, they're going to destroy you by economic sanctions. Just see how Europe is slowly getting into economic trade bloc with Latin America, which is your sphere of influence, American sphere of influence, is going to be in trade blocs with Africa, with Japan, with China, with Russia. So the house of Israel, you're totally isolated, and your economic prosperity is going down, and it's going to crash upon you. And they're going to torment you first with economic blockades, which is described in the house of Ezekiel, in the book of Ezekiel, as siege. And then when they weaken you with economic blockades, you'll plus have the various, not hurricanes, you'll have a horrible drought, which is prophesied in the Bible. It's going to cause starvation. And economic blockades are going to cause lack of goods. And you're going to see riots on your streets, just like you saw on St. Martin Saint Martin Island after the hurricane, and in other places. You're going to see riots in the streets, people fighting. There'll be cannibalism in the land, and then the invasion is going to come. The invasion of Europe on you, modern House of Israel. And then all of you who survived that blitzkrieg of Germans will be taken captive into the concentration camps, just like the Jewish people were taken to concentration camps. And you'll be murdered. It's all written in Ezekiel chapter 5. But many people don't read that. They don't want to understand it. They don't want to deal with that. But it's happening. It's going to happen. And it's not going to pass away because America and Britain are not repenting of their sins. Last night has proven that. How many of you participated, not many of you who are listening to this, but some of you who might be listening to this, how many of you participated in the most satanic of all so-called Christian festivals? So it's coming. Another Constantine is coming. And unless it's part of the scripture, the Apostle Paul in the New Testament prophesies about him. He speaks about him as a man of sin, the son of perdition. And he says, you may wonder, okay, people are not much religious. How in the world are they going to force people to become religious? Well, by false miracles, you see. Because this prophesied one, this new Constantine, is going to enforce his legislation and his rule by false miracles. And of course, people who don't know the Bible, who don't read the Bible, they'll think, oh, this must be from God. Yes, it is from God, but not from God of the Bible, not from God of Israel. It is from God of this world, from Satan the devil. But people who keep Halloween and keep all of these satanic holidays, they have no idea, they're not interested in what is in the Bible, they will not recognize that those are satanic deceptions. And then, when he is in place, in power, he is going to keep with economic sanctions and other things to weaken the house of Israel before invading it. But those of you who live in Europe and want to keep the Torah, or even elsewhere, well, beware. Be prepared to give your life. Your human rights are not going to be respected, and you're not going to be tolerated. So the concentration camps and all the horrible things that happened to the house of Judah are going to happen again. But this time they will encompass the house of Israel and all of the keepers of the Ten Commandments. That's why it says in Revelation, this is the patience of the saints. The patience of the saints. We have to endure. And don't just fall for this horrible so-called Christian rubbish. Oh, we are saved. You think that you keep the Torah and you're saved? No, you're not. Jesus Christ says those who endure to the end will be saved. We haven't seen the end yet. And until the end, we're going to see the false prophet helping the first beast, helping the European dictator. We're going to see the Great Tribulation. We're going to see implementation of the paganized, satanized Christianity. It'll be enforced by the law, and you'll be threatened with death, with capital punishment. There is only one word mentioned only once in the Bible. It's in Revelation chapter 20, and in verse 4. It speaks about those who will be coming in the first resurrection, who were beheaded for the testimony that they gave. That word beheaded is only mentioned once. And it is obviously particularly mentioned in context of the last generation of Torah keepers, last generation of Christians. They're going to make a public show of you. Guillotine is going to become, it's going to be back in fashion. And they're going to behead you or me for keeping the Torah and believing in the true Jesus Christ. We have to be prepared for that. A new Constantine is going to do that. And if we are not going to obey the new Constantine, the head of the state, European superstate, and if we are not going to obey the established religion, which will be some form of Roman Catholicism or some sort of ecumenical so-called Christianity, because they love one another, and today or yesterday they celebrated the anniversary of so-called Protestant Reformation, both Catholics and Protestants. Isn't that amazing? If we don't obey their ecumenical Christianity, and if we don't want to submit to the ruler, the head of the state, we will be beheaded. We have to be prepared for that. And many of you are not prepared for that, I'm afraid. Many of you have this romantic vision about how wonderfully and great life will be. It is great, it is wonderful. But yes, we have to pay the price down the road. We have to pay the price for being obedient to the Eternal, to the Father, to God of Israel.
That's right.
And we have to pay the price because then the reward will be beyond our imagination.
Right.
But many of you at the House of Israel have this romantic feeling, oh, we need to go into the land. Before you go into the land, there are things that will have to happen. And the Holocaust of Ephraim is going to happen. And it's going to be officiated by the new Constantine. And because Constantine is so well known now among our listeners, we'll call this new European dictator, we'll call him from this point on, New Constantine, which will be far worse than the first one, because the first one didn't make any false miracles. This one is going to even bring fire from heaven, and people are going to worship him. That's what it says in Revelation chapter 13. The whole world worships the beast. And the whole world says, oh, who is mighty as the beast? Who can war with him? So he's going to have a military machine. Europe is going to have a mighty army. Many people, we already warned about that before, many people don't believe that. You'll see that with your own eyes. It'll be a mighty army. And that's the army that is going to conquer the House of Israel, the modern House of Israel, America and Britain primarily. So we have to be prepared, we have to be prepared for what is all written in the Bible. Yes,
That's
our
right.
lives are blessed, are great, but we have to be willing to give our life.
That's right.
And to endure to the end.
That's right. We get to confront reality. Everybody, for century upon century, our ancestors basically looked at the whole situation and anticipated what could take place and thought about it and speculated about it. But we, on the other hand, are going to have the opportunity to experience it, which is both a huge blessing and an incredible, incredible hardship.
That's right. And before coming to the land, again, first comes the Great Tribulation. Now, most of you out there don't understand that the day of the Lord is the time just before the return of the Messiah, when the Lord himself is going to intervene in human affairs. And he will start to liberate the house of Israel.
Right.
And that is amazing. And then the second Exodus is going to come. But only after the Great Tribulation, in which only 10% of Israelitish nations are going to survive. You see? And then comes the second Exodus of Israel. So you cannot inherit the land. You cannot go into, well, you might try, but you'll not really fare very well.
Right. We have to do this according to the plan.
Yes, the land belongs to Judah. And Jewish people are very strict about that, and that's fine. That's how it is now. So before the second Exodus, before the returning to the land, we don't know how many of us are going to die for our faith.
That's right.
We don't know that. Well, we have to be prepared for that. So don't feel offended when I when I ask a question, are we willing to die? That's the question I ask myself almost daily.
Yes.
Because I'm not sure that I'm willing to do that. You see, I ask myself, are you willing to die for what you believe?
Yes.
Are you willing to give up your life for what you believe? And I'm not sure that the answer is positive in my case. Now, don't be sure that the answer is positive in your case, you see, because Satan is very subtle. All the listeners. Satan is very subtle and deceptive. So that's the question we have to keep asking ourselves all the time. Are we going to endure to the end? Are we going to have strength and power and find it in the eternal to endure to the end? The end is not yet upon us. It's close, but not yet there.
Right. That's right.
So there is no reason for anybody to be offended when I ask, are we willing to die for our faith? Many of us may just die there, and will die at the hands of new Constantine, the coming European dictator, new Hitler. Call him whatever you want. He is the one who is going to impose upon the whole world this Constantine Christianity. Easter, Christmas, Sunday, cross.
Yes.
That's the mark of the beast, The mark of the beast in the widest sense is idolatry. The idolatry that was practiced by our ancestors, Israelites. That's why they lost their identity. That's why God scattered them into all the nations, and that's why God expelled them from the land. Because they worship the sun. See, sun worshipping, is going to become official European religion, but it won't be called sun worshipping, it will be called Christianity. Of course, having false Christ, who supposedly rose on Sunday and supposedly was crucified on Friday evenings. You find me 3 days and 3 nights, the Jonah mark in that tradition. There is all of the so-called Christian tradition is totally upside down. It's totally wrong, friends.
Yes, fitting 3 days and 3 nights into that would be a true miracle.
Right.
You're absolutely right.
So, exactly. So, it's all of that so-called Christianity is going to be imposed upon us by the law.
That's
And
right.
whoever doesn't want to submit, he'll be beheaded. Mark that word in Revelation chapter 20, verse 4. You know, it is amazing. The only word in Strong's that you'll find there, beheading, is right there. It's obviously in the context in the law of the last generation of commandment keepers, the last generation of those who want to stay faithful to God. There'll be a public spectacle, you know, made out of those, of course, to instill fear in all the others. And the message will be, well, unless you submit to the head of the state, the new Constantine, you are going to end up just like this. We have to be prepared for that. We have to be prepared for giving up our life.
That's right.
And then, and only then, the second Exodus is going to come. And I have plenty of exciting things to tell you about the second Exodus, written right there in the Bible. Let me just give you a little teaser. Do you realize that there is indication in the Bible that the delta of Nile is going to be dried up?
Yes.
You know, and do you understand the magnitude of the second Exodus? Because 10% of the current house of Israel will be at least about 50 million people. We don't really know how many, but plenty. Now imagine from all four corners of the earth, now millions of people going to the Holy Land. What a witness to the world, brethren.
Yes.
And friends. Well, great witness to the world. But before that, we have to endure. We have to build up a character. Those of you who love Messiah, we have to build up Christ-like character. Those of you who love the Torah, we have to build a Torah-like character. Or those of us who love both, we have to build both. And it's not yet, and the new Constantine is coming up. We are going to watch closely about him. I'm going to, you know, I keep watching along with all of you. And as soon as he's there, we will be able to recognize him. He is still not there. What we know about him, he'll be of German descent. He'll be president of the European superstate. He'll be the head of the European mighty military. And obviously, he'll be involved in peace process in the Middle East. Because there is a prince mentioned in Daniel chapter 9. That's the prophecy about him. And then later, that prince becomes king. So he'll be a lower ranking politician at first, probably some sort of diplomat. And then he'll rise to the position of the king. That is, of the top man. He'll become the top man in the state, European state. And then it says that in the middle of that peace, Middle East peace agreement, he's going to break it.
Right.
And then, of course, he's going to attack the lands of Israel. He's going to occupy Jerusalem and the Holy Land. He's going to open up concentration camps. He's going to exterminate all of those who will not submit to his rule. And then only after the Great Tribulation will come the second Exodus.
Yes.
The second Exodus of millions of surviving Israelites. And it is an amazing topic. And when we cover, if you would do me a favor, when we cover these, all of the tribes, we came now to the tribe of Joseph. We'll cover it at some other point. We have several tribes to cover. We have Joseph and Reuben and Benjamin and Asher and Zebulun and Naphtali. When we cover those tribes, and Gad, when we cover all these other tribes, all these remaining 7, I would love to speak about the second Exodus of Israel. I think it's very much misunderstood topic.
Yes, and I think it's going to be such a supernatural event that that it will in itself, it will exemplify. I mean, for those who have basically turned their faces from Yehovah and tried to avoid acknowledging his supernaturalness, that singular event will prove beyond the slightest shadow of a doubt the supernaturalness of everything he's doing.
And there is also indication that there will be nations who will be resisting this. Yes, there is indication in the Bible, you see. So it is there, but it wasn't my time to understand it until now. And I think now the time has come
that's right,
to share that precious things with all of us. I mean, it is exciting, it is great, but we just have to endure. We have to keep encouraging one another, helping one another. We have to endure. The world is evil. We cannot participate in the world customs. We cannot keep the Halloween. We cannot keep the pagan holidays and claim to be Torah observants or Christians, true Christians at least.
Right.
There is no way, because God doesn't want to have anything to do with paganism. We cannot be two wells and have pure water and polluted water in us. It doesn't work that way.
That's right.
God wants our pure hearts and pure minds, our pure thoughts. He wants us to love Him with all our minds and strength and soul, and we cannot do that if we just indifferently participate in this world religion. And that's the problem with the last generation of Christians in the church of Laodicea. It's, they're indifferent. They know the truth, but they still compromise and they just participate in all of these world evils. It doesn't work that way. And because of that, Jesus Christ tells them, I'm about to spew you out of my mouth, which really means to spew into the Great Tribulation. There'll be many martyrs in the Great Tribulation. And many of you who observe the Torah and stuff, who are listening to this, be prepared. There'll be many martyrs. They'll be martyred by the new Constantine and, of course, with the blessing of the false prophet who will be in alliance with this coming new Constantine. And that's what is written in the Bible. And we have to speak about that because that's part of the revelation of God. And many of you out there, I've seen some of you in Jerusalem, some of you think that you have some special revelations and special visions from God. Well, I'm afraid you don't. And I'm afraid you're very deceived, because if you had true revelations, you would be having understanding, you'll be understanding all of this. And if you want true revelations, they're all written there in the Bible, in the prophets, and we can go through those, and we can establish them. And we can clearly understand them. And many of you don't really have true revelations. Many of you are just plainly deceived. Because otherwise you would be understanding what is written in the Bible. There is enough there in the Bible, enough visions and stuff in the Bible. So let's keep up with the Bible, let's keep our noses in the Bible, and let's just not let ourselves be taken away with this vain glory, or thinking that God only waited for special me to appear and that give me some special vision. God doesn't work that way. So His written word is right there. Yes, we may understand it. He may reveal better understanding to some of us in due course. That's fine. We are there to love one another humbly and build Christ-like, Torah-like character if we want to endure to the end and inherit the kingdom, the coming glorious kingdom of God, which is at the same time the glorious kingdom of Israel. And none of us is saved until we endure to the very end. And until the very end, we'll see many horrible things. Many horrible things. Awful things. And yes, that's part of the Bible, that's part of the biblical revelation. So let's keep up our eyes set on the true Bible doctrines.
Yes, absolutely, brother. Aleksandar Veljic, I cannot tell you how much I appreciate you. And I know there are many, many other people who will listen to this podcast that will say the same thing. Thank you for giving us freely of your time. Thank you for giving us freely of your understanding. And we'll look forward to having you on very, very soon for the next installment in the ongoing saga of Israel, which you present so well. Thank you, brother. And for all of you out there who will be listening to this, I have one thing to say, the same thing I always say. Remember who you are.
Let your people come together in unity. What a blessing He's commanding when we're together, the oil flowing, descending from the heavens like the morning dew, pouring on our heads, precious soul from you, falling from the mountain, water fresh and cool, running down the beard and we know it's true. How pleasant, how good